Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm going to walk you through a fiscal update. So what I've basically done is gone out to the Royal Bank economics area and pulled down basically their latest projections on debt and deficit as terms of what they're looking at in terms of the provinces as well as the federal government. So this presentation is geared to kind of look at the issues around debt and deficits as well as certain policies that are going to drive economic growth over the next year to 2 years out. So this presentation is going to, as I said, looking at spending. Now it's only one perspective. You're more apt to go out to other government sites, even banking sites, to get another perspective. So I'll talk about employment, I'll talk about wages, I'll talk about surplus deficit equalization, I'll talk about internal trade barriers as well as the health accord. So if we look at employment, and this is looking at government employment. So basically since December of 2015, in terms of the overall employment growth, we've seen roughly government or government-related jobs grow basically about 50,000 jobs this year, where the service goods producing sector has actually shrunk over that period of time. So it's to understand things in play. So the government's funding has created jobs. Now, in terms of sustainability, that's a big issue because they are government-funded programs. Now, are we able to support that level of spending? It's something to be up for debate. Now, I looked at wages too as well. If you look at the overall wage growth, and this falls in line to a lot of the municipal, provincial, and federal governments, they put wage restrictions in terms of growth. So overall, since the beginning of the year, we've seen basically no wage real growth in government wages, which is a good thing in a way because the gap, when you look at benefits and from pension to salaries, is about 15 to 20% greater than the private sector. And that's another thing that comes back to looking at in terms of sustainability. Now, this is a good test to show you that based on the projections, based on the fiscal year ending 2016 to 2017, we're on track to add another $42 billion worth of deficit to the government debt. So the net debt actually includes deficits. Now if you look into this particular table, you will see a couple things in here. You'll see the highlighted ones, Nova Scotia, British Columbia, are going to be running surpluses. Now Quebec's showing zero because their previous fiscal cycle, 2015 to 2016, they actually had a $2 billion surplus. Now what's that mean in the whole scheme of things? Well, now if you look at the third column, and equalization is based on a moving average, so out of fairness it hasn't been adjusted for the economic growth changes where we've seen negative growth in Alberta and Saskatchewan, where we're seeing positive growth in Ontario and Quebec, and that impacts on equalization because basically equalization is a pot of money given to the have-not provinces, and that's something to bear in mind. Now if we look at that, and this is where you're going to see people upset in Alberta and Saskatchewan, where they're contributing a lot of equalization. There are have-not problems right now due to economic conditions from the oil, agricultural products and all that are putting strains on their budget. And you look at economic growth projections, both Alberta and Saskatchewan in essence are in a recession. Now if you look at the other provinces like Ontario and Quebec, they're not growing at leaps and bounds, but they're at least growing. Now the other thing that comes into play that's been fighting for years and probably decades is the whole idea of movement of goods and people between provinces. This causes a lot of problems in terms of competitiveness and productivity. It's an area that doesn't seem to want to be addressed because I think you've got few provinces that are probably bringing in protectionism policies that's restricting growth. This is an area that needs to be highlighted more because it's impacting overall economic growth, and it's an area that needs to be really stopped. Because if you're going to really improve the efficiency of the Canadian businesses and the ability to be cost effective, then you have to be able to reduce barriers that impact those businesses from expanding or keeping their cost in line. Now, the other thing into play is the health accord. Now, it hasn't been signed off, but what the proposal was when Stephen Harper was in government is to tie healthcare spending to 3%. So, in other words, he's wanting to tie it to GDP growth. Now, the bare minimum that the healthcare expenditures will grow out is 3%. It doesn't mean that they won't grow higher than that. It all depends on the economic things, economic conditions in Canada. But what it's driving here is what Harper wanted to do is ensure that the program was sustainable. Now, what you're going to see now is there's been backlash, starting in Ontario and other provinces, because they're having a hard time delivering healthcare dollars. Now, let's look at that. That being said, healthcare dollars should be going through value for money audits. They should be looking at cost of delivery. We should be looking at the whole structure of how those dollars are maximized. What you're seeing here, it's easy to fix a problem when you look at the symptoms, but that doesn't make the problem go away. You have to look at the root cause. In a lot of cases, some of this comes back to delivery. Is there things they can do? Yes, they can look at executive compensation. They can look at how they deliver health care. Maybe they outsource more to the private sector. Maybe they look at how they get together on drug buying, which is already into consideration. Those are factors that need to be considered as part of looking at this. It's not just throw money at it, because that doesn't solve it. You have to have a proper plan to measure these milestones and make sure you're achieving the outcome. And that's what's kind of interesting, because the new government in power over a year had basically said they're going to up the transfers. Now they've changed that statement. Now they're going to follow Stephen Harper's goals. So the idea of where they ran on and to the actual reality is two different things, because what drives anything are budgets. And if the government can't afford something, they can't drive that process. And that's something to bear in mind as you're moving forward. Now this is a brief presentation to kind of give you an idea of debt and deficit, that we've got serious challenges in Canada, and it's something that we need to look at as terms of how we move forward both at municipal, provincial, and federal level. Thank you.